Hi, I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and I'm going to show you how to service and maintain a Laguna Pressure Flo filter. So this is the Laguna pressurised filter here. We've got it buried in the ground. It's a small unit, ideal for cleaning small fish ponds up to perhaps sort of 300 or 400 gallons. It's a pressurised system, so it's completely buried in the ground here and completely sealed with inlet and outlet hoses. A separate discharge here for cleaning, for backwash, and an integrated UVC on the top here. With the Laguna, anything yellow, they've adopted a colour coordinated sort of system that anything yellow is mechanical, something that can physically be moved or manipulated. So we've got push buttons here to remove the connectors, levers here for backwashing, and a yellow valve here to twist for the maintenance. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch off the pump and the electrics, which have already been done. I'm going to disconnect the inlet and the outlet hoses from the unit, and I'm going to undo the 4 screws that are around the top here of the UVC unit. So I'll just do that. Right, so I've undone the 4 Phillips screws around the side here. I'm now just going to remove the inlet and the outlet pipes. So with Laguna, we've got a mixture here of old connectors and new connectors, the new ones being the yellow. If you just press this little plastic kind of spring clip, and you can twist and remove the hose tails, like so. And with the UV system here, now the screws are undone, you can lift off to reveal the electrics and the quartz sleeve. Now you want to be careful with this. The quartz sleeve is very fragile. There we go, put that to one side. Now, a couple of things to notice that you don't want to lose. You've got a main seal here, a main O-ring, which sits inside this housing. Sometimes it might come away with the quartz sleeve here. More often than not, it's left inside the unit. You don't want to lose that, so take that out and look after it. I'll just disconnect this second hose here, which is a bit of a two-hand job, so excuse me one moment. Right, so now the hoses have been disconnected and we've removed the electrics and the quartz sleeve from the top, we can actually lift the lid entirely off of the filter. And to do that, you'll see around the outside you've got a metal locking clamp here, and more often than not you've got this little sort of key holder here which prevents somebody from opening the clamp. You can just remove that and put that to one side, and then open this clamp, and now the whole lid will lift off, revealing, what have we got in here? Pretty mucky filter. So that's the main stack of filter foams. And now I'm going to vacuum out and remove all of the wastewater from in here. There's some filter media further at the bottom. I'll give that a clean. And then the main purpose of today is to put a new service kit in. So Laguna, do service kits like this, which comprise of a new set of foams, a new UV tube, gasket, silicone grease, etc. And in spring it's very important to overhaul filtration systems for ponds, particularly if you want the pond to be clear and clean. So new UV tubes, new foams stand the pond in good stead for the rest of the season. So the filter chamber has been fully emptied. Again, for this purpose I've used an Awaza Pondovac. You can scoop it out. If the unit's not too tight in the ground, you could actually lift the whole canister out and take it away to clean. But for this particular purpose, I've left it in place and I've just hoovered out the muck. At the very bottom, you've got these bags of Alka-Grog biological media, which are a little bit mucky, so they come out and they just get cleaned off. And around the top here, you've got the main filter seal. So I'll just use the key that was holding the clamp together. You can use anything, and just take that seal out, put that to one side. That's going to be cleaned up and put back, and then we can start to assemble the unit with the new bits and pieces. The old stack of foams here are going to be removed, and I'll replace that with a new set, and then we'll get this cleaned up and put it back together. So to remove the old stack of foams from the unit, in fact sometimes this canister will stay inside the filter box. The top simply slides off, and the foams you can just remove from the little holder. Now the problem with these are, and this is a problem really with all sort of pressurised canister systems. There's a lot of pressure that builds up inside these units, and if they're not regularly cleaned and maintained, all sponges start to compress and shrink. And these units here have shrunk to such an extent that when you're performing your backwash or your clean, which in this instance, by lifting this lever you're scraping the outside of the sponges, in actual fact this isn't contacting any of the foam at all because the sponges have shrunk so much, which is why it's important to replace these. And if you compare that to a new sponge, there's quite a difference in size. So always worth replacing these. I'd recommend doing this once a year. Any pressurised system, a new set of foams, a new UV tube makes a big difference. So put the foams back on. Now in this kit you also get a replacement UV tube, which should be replaced once a year in spring as standard. And you get a couple of replacement UVC quartz O-rings and some main seals, and the little tube of silicone grease as well, which is very handy to lubricate all of the seals and bits and pieces. You have got instructions in there as well, but that's what I'm for. I wouldn't be too concerned about making this spotless. It's going to pick up muck again very quickly, but just clear away the worst of the crud. What is important is you want to make sure that the unit itself is clean on all of the areas that are attached to seals or gaskets, making sure there's no bits of grit or sand or sediment which might stop it from going back together again nice and easily. So I would always clean the inside of the lid, and where the locking clamp fits I would clean that as well. Now with the Laguna systems, the hose tails fit on and they clamp into position with a plastic kind of spring clip, and it's these little orange O-rings that are very important. If you haven't got those, or they're old or perished, the unit's going to weep. So you can take these off, like so. I've just used a screwdriver there just to try and sort of wedge underneath and get it out, but we'll lose both of those. I'll also do the third one, which is the backwash, the discharge here. And replace that one. It's worth having a bit of tissue or some paper or kitchen roll, something you can use to clean up the mess. And again, even if the O-rings, the original O-rings, are still looking in good order, replace it as standard. Do it every year. Good service will make the unit last a lot longer and will save you any potential problems in the future. There we go. Now lubricating the seals, silicone grease is the best thing, and as I say, Laguna do come with a little tube. I think they're a bit mean with how much they give you. It would be nice if you had a bit more. It's just about enough to get all these seals done. People do use Vaseline for seals. Now, a lot of people say that petroleum jelly can damage the compounds and the rubber in seals. I've also heard that was only true with the older rubbers, and that newer rubber is resistant to this. Personally, I have used Vaseline without any problems at all, but I think silicone grease is a much better quality product and a much better lubricant. So if you can get hold of that, or silicone grease with PTFE inside as well, which helps to prevent any sort of small leaks, it's fantastic. There we go, so we do that. So to reassemble the filter, the foams on their little stand there slide into the unit like so, and the next thing is to get all this area cleaned up, ready to reassemble, and make sure that the lid goes back nice and smoothly. First of all, I'm going to remove the locking clamp entirely. Just open it up, stretch it a little bit, and you'll be able to then pull it off. And I always give the clamp itself a bit of a clean, particularly on the inside. Generally, most units, people don't tend to open these for at least 6 months, sometimes just once a year. And during that time, a lot of dirt and muck, you often get sort of ants' nests built up in here and slugs and all sorts. So all that needs to be cleaned off, and just run a bit of tissue around the inside. And also this area here where the main O-ring sits, that needs to be cleaned up. That's very important. So again, I shall run a little bit of tissue in here a couple of times around to clean up. I can put the lid back on, put the clamp back together, reassemble the inlet and outlet hoses, and then we're ready to tackle the replacement of the UV tube, and then put the electrics back together. So everything's cleaned up and ready to go back. I've given the main seal a bit of a wipe with some tissue and given a couple of dabs of silicone grease on there as well, just to add a little bit of lubricant. And that can go back in. Make sure that the clamp goes into position first before you attempt to put the lid on. Otherwise you'll have to take the lid off to put the clamp back. And then the lid itself can go into place. Now again, this is a two-hand job. I'll put it all back together again, close the clamp, and then I'll show you how to do the UVC. So the lid's been put back on. I've reconnected the inlet and the outlet hoses. I shall replace this locking cap to go over the backwash. That's important. If you don't put this back, you might find this area weeps. So we'll keep that on. And now we can tackle the UV. Now we've got one Phillips screw here, which we undo. We don't have to remove it entirely, we just have to undo it 3 or 4 turns, and that screw will then allow this locking collar to rotate anti-clockwise, and it can be undone, and that can be pulled away. And then very carefully we're going to pull and lift this quartz sleeve off to reveal the UV tube. Now again, I must stress, you've got to be very careful with this. It's very fragile, they are easy to break, and it's quite a stressful moment trying to pull this out, but it's something that has to be done. I have found that if you've got a very difficult tube that doesn't like to come away with a little bit of force, putting a heat gun, putting some warm air around this area seems to warm up the seal and make it a bit easier to pull this away. So if you're doing this in cold weather particularly, it's worth putting a bit of heat around here first. So the screw's been undone, the locking collar has been rotated anti-clockwise. It's only sort of a half twist and then it unlocks, and then I've removed the quartz sleeve. Carefully put that to one side. The UV tube, it's a standard PLL UVC tube. This particular one, it's an 11 watt tube in this unit. So the UV tube, it just fits in very simply with 2 little pins, locates and clicks into position nice and positively. It's always best not to touch a UV tube with bare hands if you can help it. It shortens the life of a tube, and UV tubes contain mercury and other nasty things, so I think it's always best to wear a pair of gloves. This area here where the seals sit, there's always a bit of silt and muck that collects, so just wipe a bit of tissue around there and give that a clean. And likewise in here, this is what comes into contact with the main quartz sleeve seal and electric seal here, so give that area a good clean as well to make sure that any contact with seals are good ones. Now the next thing is to make sure that the quartz sleeve itself is clean. It's pointless replacing the tube and then having a dirty quartz sleeve, because that's really reducing the amount of UV light which is coming into contact with pond water. So we'll give this a bit of a wipe down with some tissue or something a bit more abrasive to try and get that cleaned up. So I've just given the quartz sleeve a bit of a wipe down. It's not spotless, but it's a heck of a lot better. That's going to allow a lot more of that light to come into contact with the pond water and kill off the single-celled algae which causes green water and other nasties. The 2 seals at the bottom, just take them off, give them a clean, and then just put a little bit of silicone grease around there to lubricate, and then we can reassemble the quartz sleeve and put it all back together. So the locking collar and the quartz sleeve has gone back onto the unit. I've just gently pushed the quartz sleeve down, pushed the collar and then this will just twist and lock into place, and you'll see that the screw will locate back in line with the locking lugs here. There we go. And then as a final precaution, you can tighten up this screw. That's just a safety measure to make sure that it can't be opened by accident. So this is ready to have a final wipe down and then to be relocated back into the filter unit. So to reassemble the UV, don't forget the UV seal. I've given that a wipe with a bit of lubricant, and this area in here I've just wiped a bit of tissue to clean that up, and that seal sits in there like so. The quartz sleeve and the electrics will then sit into this area like so, and then we'll simply tighten up these 4 screws and be ready to turn it on and check for any leaks. So the unit's been reassembled. I've put the locking collar back into place and the little preventative key to stop that from being opened by accident. All the screws are tightened up, and I'm checking now to make sure that there's no leaks from any obvious places. The first being the transition between the top and the main base, so around this clamp. It's possible if you've got plants and bits and pieces close by, which more often than not people have around filters, if you get a bit of plant caught up between the seal and the lid, and then you clamp it together, that area is going to leak. It seems quite obvious, but it's very easy to do. Another leak spot is just to make sure that all of the inlet, the outlets and the blanking cover here are pushed on correctly and nothing's weeping, and that's all nice and clean. And finally, where the UVC sits here, just to make sure that there's no weeping around the top. That all looks good to me, so that's fine to go. Finally, you can just check to make sure that the UV tube that you've installed is working correctly. You'll see that on top of the Laguna unit here you've got a little clear panel. That's a window through to the UV, and you can see it clearly glowing purple there, or blue, to show you that's working. So that's all complete. So that's the service on the Laguna filter complete. New set of foams, new gaskets, new UV tube. Pretty simple, worth doing once a year. I hope you find this video helpful. If you have any queries at all, you can contact me on the link at the bottom of the page. Thank you for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics.